ladies and gentlemen, everyone around and in between. It is DebateSensei. This is our NPDA edition that we are doing, where we talk about competitive debate-related issues, specifically to the National Parliamentary Debate Association, anything related to that. My resident expert is Gabriel Gravel from SDSU, graduate student, debate coach, and the 2022 NPTE champion, the National Parliamentary Tournament of Excellence. Thank you very much, Gabe, for being here.
Yeah, it's good to be here. I'm excited.
Excellent. So NPDA, that was my event, but my last tournament was in 2003. So we just passed where I got runner-up at NPTE. So it's nice to have somebody that's in the same sort of event that I'm used to. I'm talking to NFALD and CETA and BP and stuff like that. So thank you so much for being here. All right.
Yeah, of course. I didn't know you did so well at NPTE.
Oh, well, yeah, it was a lifetime ago. I don't know if we got 64 teams at that point. I don't know if it was that big yet. It might have been. It was growing pretty much when we were there. Anyways, so we're talking about NPDA. Now, my very first tournament was in 1997. So I'm very interested to see how the perspective of the event has changed over time. What were you told about NPDA when you were getting recruited for the first time?
My experience with NPDA started in college, or not in college, in high school. We always had, I went to high school in the Portland area, and we were right next to the Lewis and Clark campus, who, during my time in high school, had a very competitive NPDA program. And my high school would employ different NPDA debaters to help coach the team. So it was actually mainly my senior year of high school. I was coached by someone at the Lewis and Clark program, and they sort of showed us what the tournament was like, what the format was like. Lewis and Clark always runs a tournament every year, so we would go to that tournament to sort of get exposure to college debate, see rounds. And I had multiple teammates from high school who graduated and went on to do NPDA while they were in college. So it was always fun to watch them debate at the Lewis and Clark tournament.
Yeah, I remember Lewis and Clark. They always brought some strong teams. They were pretty well established. It's nice to hear that that's still going on. What was some of the lore behind NPDA? And what I mean by that is, when I first was joining, it made sure that they told us, about the different styles of debate, and NPDA was kind of a reaction to some of the more fast-paced types of debate, and it was supposed to be more conversational and off the cuff and things like that.
Well, that certainly changed by the time I heard about NPDA. In the Oregon high school circuit, we have Parley, which is styled after NPDA. It's not available in every high school circuit. It's not an NSDA event, I don't think. But we had it in Oregon, and it was explained as a more progressive, fast-paced style of the high school version, and it was likened quite a bit to policy.
Okay.
Obviously, there's like structural differences, but at the college level, at least in the high school level in Oregon, the only really progressive form of debate at the time was policy. So to hear that a format in college was more similar to policy meant that it was more progressive, faster, larger amount of like progressive arguments and stuff.
Okay. That's interesting. So there's a new style of debate that seems to be taking over that sort of role, which is IPDA, and it seems to have now sort of absorbed that purpose of getting people in and just sort of being conversational. It's supposed to be for everybody, but it seems like it's taken a more specialized direction in the last 20 years, huh?
Yeah, I think that NPDA definitely, ever since I've known about NPDA, I've known it as a progressive debate format.
Mhm.
IPDA is definitely sort of taken the mantle as the more conversational, more focus on speaking style and less on uh, progressive styles of argument.
Did anyone talk to you about like the history of NPDA, like, or did they contextualize it a little bit more?
That wasn't until I got to college.
Mm,
With everything debate related, it's all an oral history, and the people who are telling the oral history have different perspectives based on which event they liked more.
mhm,
The way it was always explained to me is that, like most debate formats, they branched off from a previous format in response to it getting too progressive or not being as slow and conversational as maybe administrators would like it to be. Um, NPDA, as I was told, I understood it to be the like first parliamentary uh, branch off, obviously,
mhm.
other than like BP. But there are quite a few differences between NPDA and BP. Some of the subsequent types of debate, like IPDA and APDA, were branches off of NPDA itself.
Right. So now that you brought up BP, there are a lot of different associations with the word parliamentary in it, right? And so you got BP, APDA, and NPDA, I think are the most prominent. Now, am I right that NPDA still has the most membership? Have you heard one way or the other?
I'm really unsure what membership looks
Okay.
like in the other parliamentary formats. I will say that NPDA is sort of at a population bottleneck,
Oh yeah.
to put it one way. There's been pretty large declines in enrollment and membership for the better part of the last decade.
Really?
Um, the first national tournament I went to was in 2019 in Salt Lake City. And that tournament, I believe, broke to double octos,
Hmm.
which at the time was pretty small for NPDA because NPDA was always a massive tournament uh, with usually triple digit entries.
Hmm.
Um, Ever since then, I've never been to a national tournament that broke beyond double octos, much less a tournament in general that broke beyond double octos. There's certainly been a pretty sharp decline in total membership. And that was, I think, exacerbated in part by virtual debates and COVID
Okay.
19, but also I think that virtual debates also kind of prevented further attrition because it kind of kept the teams that were interested in it able to go and kept them floating for a little bit.
So what do you think? Like you said that COVID exacerbated it, but there was already momentum in the downward um, motion of membership. What do you think? Did you hear why that might be?
There's a lot of competing explanations, but I think the simplest explanation is that administrators are increasingly no longer interested in NPDA.
Mm,
I think that there's a lot of different reasons why this is the case. I think a lot of schools I know found NFALD as a like safer
huh,
alternative, or I think one or two schools I know have tried returning to policy or CETA style debate. There isn't one explanation beyond that these teams just stop getting funding.
okay.
Um, and the reason that administrators decide to stop funding is varied.
Oh man. Um, well, let's talk about why that might be. Do you? Wait, it's just a decision they see a reason to save money, perhaps. But if some teams are moving to NFALD, NFALD is a single topic all season long. Do you think
Mhm.
that has any influence on it? NPDA has a different topic every single round, right? Like, do you think that plays an influence? What do you think pedagogically those two differences result in? I don't know. Let's explore this a little bit.
I think being a limited prep event requires a different type of barrier to entry. If you've never done any sort of NPDA types of debate, you decide to go to a tournament and you have a coach who also hasn't done it or doesn't have very much experience, you're immediately going to be at a pretty big disadvantage because there's a lot of rather like unspoken norms. There's a lot of the argumentation style, like the way we organize arguments is a little bit differently, is a little bit different. The way we structure our files, what's expected is, it's different like it is with any debate, but because it's all limited prep and there's not like existing files that exist on like a wiki or like to be disclosed or something, it's harder for people with no understanding of NPDA to gain a specific like screenshot of what the format looks like at the moment that they're trying to start debating in it. I also think that it asks a lot more of coaches to prep teams in NPDA than it does if you are, say, prepping one AF for a bunch of NFALD debaters. It's certainly different skills, but coaches are required to prep their students at tournaments. They are doing as much research and work as their students, sometimes in the prep rooms before rounds, and it's a much more engaged process that I think when you don't have competitors or former competitors who want to go on to coach, it becomes very difficult to get students engaged and get them up to speed.
It's interesting because the amount of research that goes into the affirmatives is pretty monumental, but you're right. At the tournament itself, there's a really different expectation as far as the workload and the skills that you are bringing. That seems to be what seems to be a norm now is the prep rooms and the coaching, and especially when you get into elimination rounds, how like these coaching communes start forming, or at least that's how it was when I remember it, where it's like, okay, we got knocked out, but we could help prep this team or that team that's still in it. Is that still pretty prevalent?
Absolutely. Online tournaments made it more difficult, and we had on our elim runs, we would have maybe one or two other people helping us that weren't normally in our prep room. But when we were in person, our freshman year, when we made a deeper run at NPT, we had a whole plethora of coaches that we'd never had coaches before, who just were invested in the tournament, invested in us, and wanted to continue helping us out. And again, at our 2023 NPDA this last year, SDSU made it to the semifinals, and we were able to get a couple McKendree coaches and people to help us out. So I think the spirit of that is still there, but generally it's declined, mostly I would say because of COVID. There's less of a communal coaching community.
Right. So I want to kind of switch now to a big picture look at the current state of NPDA. Specifically, would you say that there's different identifiable regions for NPDA? Like, do you discuss it? Is there a shorthand for it? Do people talk about it at all?
Yeah, I would say there definitely are regions. There were more distinct regions when I started in 2018. But since during my career, a lot of schools dropped out, a lot of regions entirely dropped out. What we have now as far as regions goes is more a loose shell. And the differences between regions, especially with online, both coaching and debating, are a lot less distinct. The primary regions when I started were the Pacific Northwest, California, Texas, the Midwest, and then to a lesser extent the West, which would be anywhere from Idaho to Utah to
Okay.
Vegas.
Got it. Okay.
I would say now, however, the primary regions are California and Texas, and those other regions have a few schools that typically have a few teams. Whitman is still fielding quite a few debaters up in the Pacific Northwest, but the Pacific Northwest as a region in its entirety has all but gone the wayside.
Okay. So are they moving to NFALD, or is there another type of debate that the Pacific Northwest is going?
DOFs in the Pacific Northwest decided, well, so the big schools when I started were Oregon, which is where I went, Western Washington, Lewis and Clark, and did I say Western Washington?
Yes. Yeah.
Western Washington, and then we didn't
Puget
have
Sound.
Whitman fully back. Puget Sound was already out of NPDA by the
Were
time.
they? Darn. Damn. Man, they had some strong debaters. I remember that. That is a shame.
They did.
Okay.
Whitman wasn't quite back. Their first season back after not having a program for a number of years was actually my first season. But Western Washington and Oregon have decided to sort of move on to a new format that they have designed themselves.
Wow.
To be honest, I don't really know a lot about this format other than you're not able to use evidence not given to you by the tournament organizers, like these briefs on these topics.
Huh.
So there's not like independent research or ability to like go write a K on the topic or something. I know Lewis and Clark has moved, I believe, entirely to NFALD. I don't think they're doing anything else.
Oh, okay. That's a shame. That's a shame. I think my last year was in Oregon. We went to Lewis and Clark for NPTE, and then we went to Oregon for NPDA. That's it, man. That's sad to hear that. So Texas and California are primarily the where all the competition is.
I would say it's primarily California,
Okay.
but Texas is also has a number of good teams. The other thing about California is that there is a very strong community college circuit. Historically, the community college, the thing about NPDA is that community colleges have been competing at the same level with nationally ranked four-year schools since my recollection of NPDA's format goes. I know that there were multiple community colleges in the PNW that competed. KCC won a national championship, which is not something that a lot of community colleges do. But since this kind of shrinking in size, it's mostly concentrated in the California region for community colleges. And it seems to me, at least, that community colleges have stopped going to as many nationally competitive tournaments. Certainly, there are exceptions. El Camino College goes to what they can go to nationally competitive-wise. Diablo Valley College up in Northern California tries to go to as many as they can go to as well. But there's more of a dedicated CC-focused region circuit down here, especially in Southern California.
Yeah, I mean, there's more than 100 campuses, and a lot of them, you're right. It might be. Would you say the community colleges are kind of what's sustaining it to some degree?
Yeah, definitely. I think that part of the reason I wanted to coach at SDSU was that it was in Southern California, and even when I was competing, Southern California and the amount of community colleges they had competing in NPDA was a big draw for me. We would go to multiple SoCal tournaments from when we were at Oregon, specifically because it gave us like the largest diversity in teams and different types of judges. It gave us a lot of good practice at judge adaptation. And we always liked debating in the sort of SoCal scene. But yeah, I think they absolutely are. I think that it's easy to be really doom and gloom about NPDA broadly in like a place like the Pacific Northwest. But it seems clear to me that even if national level NPDA continues to decline, the rate at which it gets entered in down here will probably continue to persist.
Oh, well, that's cool. That's cool. I kind of want to move on to some of the changes, especially the changes that have happened since I left. And probably the biggest one is just rules based, are the time differences, like how time is used. Because it used to be just 7, 8, 8, 8, 4, 5, and then you had points of information, right? And so I haven't seen too many rounds since they made this change, but there's something called flex time now. But you can still do points of information. Is that right?
Yeah, so this change happened in the middle of my freshman year. So I remember going to tournaments that maybe it was a little bit. I was a little bit after that, but I remember going to tournaments that had invites that said no flex time, use points of information. But the norm, at least nationally at the time, was to not use points of information, to use flex time. This is just something taking NPDA away from like the parliamentary procedures of like BP and more towards the policy CEDA style organization. I think that it's a good change for high level debate. I think that interrupting is part of competing, and it's strategic when you ask your point of information if you can kind of get them off their blocks at the right time. But very generally, I haven't seen someone ask or take a point of information in probably 4 years.
Wow. Okay. So you were able to see the change. You were part of it, right? So in high school, I guess you did plenty of ones where the points of information. Sounds like you enjoyed the change as it happened.
I would generally, yeah, I do enjoy it. I think that flex time gets called flex time because you can ask questions or prep during it, but it's typically just used as prep time. I like cross-ex. I like being able to ask people questions and have them sort of have to answer it, and there's that expected back and forth. But I do think that points of information, especially when we moved online, especially would presented a lot of logistical issues, and I just don't think debaters like it very much. I think debaters would prefer to just speed through their 7 or 8 minutes and then answer questions at the end. I mean, it makes sense.
So there's cross-ex in addition to flex time, or like don't you use flex time for cross-ex, right?
Yeah, there's no specific cross-ex. So like in policy, you're supposed to keep asking questions in your cross-ex.
Right.
If you're not asking questions, you're not doing cross-ex. They won't give you the time. They'll start your prep time. But in NPDA, you can either ask questions or prep.
Okay. So if you have, so we have a different topic every round. All right. What does that do to the dynamic of like working with, especially working with teams, but just the how you view the activity and how you just the perspective you have on it?
On limited prep,
Mm-hmm.
like specifically how as a coach or as a competitor?
Oh, both, like one then the other. So yeah.
Well, I do think that limited prep is the biggest change that NPDA has versus any sort of carded debate or anything like that. Because it's limited prep, you're not expected to have like back files or cards on specific topics. You're expected to prep it all within that 25 minutes that you get the topic before your round. I think, as I said earlier, puts a lot of it's a big expectation for coaches to be able to help students prep, and it's much more related to the success of your students, how good you are at prepping. I know many teams when I competed, no matter who on the team I was hitting, we would know that they had really good prep coaches, so you could never, sort of sleep on them. As a competitor, I think that it sort of is what makes Parley Parley. It's what makes it my favorite debate event. It's why I committed so much time to it. Having multiple topics means that we get to talk about a wide variety of things, but it also sort of in the circuit creates higher amounts of creativity and diversity of arguments. People are more likely to have, well, because you can't just sit on a single AF for the entire year, you are forced to, in a way, in order to be competitive, to have multiple arguments that you're comfortable reading. If you sometimes get bad topics, and sometimes the only way to win a bad topic is to reject the topic and read a K. And that's something that I think every team, in order to be consistently competitive, has to do in NPDA, which I think makes it extremely diverse in the types of arguments we hear. But I think specifically as far as argumentation goes, not having evidence also sort of puts a premium on your ability to explain your connections between your sources and your examples and your evidence and your data in a way that we don't see in a lot of carded formats.
So the other events, is you call them carded formats. We used to always have briefs. Is it still a file set full of briefs that you are basically like rolling into any tournament with?
We have typically teams will have access to all the files that their teams wrote in previous years as kind of like a Dropbox or a drive. And often a knowledge of this drive will allow coaches to be able to recall rounds and be able to sort of just update old arguments in order to expedite prep. As far as like specific briefs, we typically did like uniqueness updates for our disads and advantages. And that was about it as far as like new information. We have old files we could always rely on. As you keep debating, you remember, we had a AI healthcare rounds last year. Let's go look at that file. Let's go see what we can use from it, what we can't use from it, or etc. But you kind of have to figure out what you're going to say on the spot.
And there are two main national tournaments. Like we already said this. So NPDA and NPTE. But I wanted to clarify that NPDA is basically like the open, and NPTE is kind of like the invitational, right? What's up with the NPTE like web page? I guess like how does I used to go and check that out all the time and look at results and stuff like that, but it looks like it's gone. How do people, do they keep track of this data still, like rankings and stuff?
Yeah. So very unfortunately, the person who maintained a lot of that information for the whole debate circuit, Zach Snyder, passed away my senior year of competing.
Wow.
He was a pillar in the community, and that's an understatement.
Oh yeah.
But he also had access to all those. He was the one who updated the points. He had access to all the bylaws, all of the accounts that they used for like sending the NPT trophies places, and a lot of the work of the NPT board, as well as just people engaged in the format of the past couple of years, has been trying to keep those systems afloat so that we can continue to run our tournaments. I don't know what we're doing this year, and I'm not exactly sure what they did last year, but I know in that first year after we lost the NPTE like rankings and all that, one of my coaches just in her free time like came up with a website that was able to calculate points and do rankings that way. And I think they used a spreadsheet last year to track everything that everybody had access to. Hopefully we can get back to that nice NPT rankings
it was
website, but
nice. It was nice. And well, that's a shame to hear about that. And so a little bit of sad news about the state of NPDA in general, but at least there's, it seems like there's a sustaining energy, at least in the community college circuit in California. And that's where I came from. I came from El Camino. That's my
I will say, I think that I do think that there are a lot of people very committed to NPDA working to preserve NPDA currently. And this first year back, 2023, we saw very good turnout compared to previous years for the national tournaments. I think that these things, they come and go. Being able to maintain a truly national debate format is pretty difficult. And if we look at just the history of truly national debate formats, they don't usually last forever anyway.
Right.
There's always kind of a push-pull, decline, and an increase in interest. But there's a lot of people doing a lot of doing a lot of work to keep NPDA afloat.
Well, that's good to hear. Yeah, and I'm going to look into that and try to donate as much as I can as well. All right. Well, I think that does it for us. Gabe, thank you so much for kicking off this series. We'll be back to talk about how to prep for your first tournament at the next one. All right.
Sounds good.